The wind was cold, and the sky was dark and full of snowflakes that danced in the air like little white feathers. Jack walked alone through the thick snow, with his coat tight and his boots heavy. He was far from the town, far from people, and far from noise. All he wanted was firewood from the old trees at the edge of the forest, but something strange pulled his eyes to the side of the road. A strange shape lay half buried in the snow, and it was not a tree or a rock or an animal. Jack stopped and stared. He walked closer, and the shape became two shapes. Two bodies close together, small and still like sleeping children, but they were not children. They were not even human. He could not believe his eyes. Their skin was blue like ice, and their clothes were thin and torn like they had run through thorns. Their fingers were long, and their eyes were closed, but not dead. He saw one of them move just a little, a small twitch like a whisper in the wind. Jack knelt in the snow. His breath came out in clouds. He reached out and touched the nearest arm. It was cold but not frozen. He pressed his fingers to the neck, a slow, weak pulse. He checked the other and felt the same. They were alive, but barely. He looked around. The snow was falling harder, and the wind screamed through the trees. He could not leave them here. They would die soon, and he could not carry both at once, but he could try. With great care, he lifted one of the sisters in his arms. She was light like a feather, but her head fell against his chest, and he could feel her shivering. He wrapped his coat tighter around them and ran back to his cabin as fast as his legs could go. His cabin was not far, but the path was hard, and the snow kept falling like a curse inside the cabin. The fire was almost out. He dropped the wood near the hearth and placed the girl on his bed. Then he ran back out to get the other sister. He could not stop now. He followed his own tracks in the snow, back to the place where she still lay waiting. The wind had almost covered her again, like the earth wanted to take her back. He picked her up too, and felt the same cold, weak life inside her. His arms were tired, but he did not stop, not even when he slipped and hit his knee on a stone. He gritted his teeth and kept walking, kept pushing through the pain and the cold. At last he reached the cabin again. He placed the second girl next to the first and quickly threw more wood into the fire. The flames rose, and the warmth began to grow. He brought blankets and wrapped them tight, then sat beside them, watching and waiting, listening to the wind outside and the slow breathing inside. One of them moved. Her eyes opened a little, glowing softly in the firelight. Her lips parted, and she whispered something in a language he did not understand. Her voice was weak, like the sound of falling snow, but it reached his heart. She looked at him, and her eyes were full of fear and confusion, and something else, something like hope. He spoke gently, telling her she was safe now. She did not answer, but her breathing calmed, her hand moved and reached for her sister. Jack helped her hold it. Their fingers locked together, and they lay like that close, and still he sat by the fire through the night, feeding the flames and watching over them. He did not sleep. He could not. These girls were not from this world, and he did not know who they were or where they came from. But he knew one thing. They needed him, and he would not let them die. As the sky outside turned pale with morning light, the snow stopped falling. The storm was over, but the real story had just begun. One of the girls opened her eyes again, and this time she looked right at Jack. Her lips moved slowly, and she said one clear word, "You." Then she closed her eyes again and slept. Jack sat in silence, his hands warm now, but his mind full of questions. Who were they? Where did they come from? And why were they alone in the snow? He had no answers, but deep in his heart, he felt something strange and strong, like a string pulled between them. Something had changed, something had started on. He knew nothing would ever be the same again. The fire crackled in the small wooden cabin as the snowstorm calmed outside. Jack sat near the hearth with tired eyes, but his heart stayed awake. His mind kept thinking about the two alien girls now resting in his bed, wrapped in thick blankets. Their blue skin looked softer in the firelight, and their breathing had become calm and steady like the rhythm of falling snow. Morning light entered through the window as the storm passed, and the world outside turned white and quiet. Jack stood up slowly and went to the corner where he kept warm water in a kettle. He poured some into a bowl and dipped a soft cloth in it, then walked over to the girls. He gently wiped the snow from their faces, careful not to wake them. One of them stirred slightly, and her hand moved toward her sister. Jack felt a strange ache in his chest, like something new was blooming. Inside him, he went to the kitchen and made warm soup with vegetables and herbs. He placed the pot over the fire and let the smell fill the cabin. After a few minutes, one of the girls opened her eyes and slowly looked around. Her gaze stopped at Jack. But she said nothing. Jack smiled a little and pointed to himself, saying his name in a calm voice. Jack, she blinked and then looked at her sister, who still slept quietly. Then she touched her chest and whispered something Jack could not understand. The sound was soft and musical, like wind through frozen trees. He repeated the sound as best as he could, and she gave a small nod. He offered her a wooden cup of soup. She stared at it for a while, then took it with both hands and sipped it slowly. Her eyes closed for a second as warmth spread through her body. Then she opened them again and looked at Jack longer this time. She still said nothing, but the fear in her face was softer now. There's some time the other sister woke up too. She sat up fast and looked around with panic in her eyes. Jack stepped back and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. The first girl spoke to her sister in their language quickly and quietly. The second girl listened, then looked at Jack with suspicion in her eyes, but she did not try to run. Jack placed another bowl of soup near her and walked back to the fire to give them space. They whispered to each other, their hands never letting go. Jack listened to the sound of their words, even though he could not understand them. Their voices were like songs made of snow and stars. Later, they both stood up slowly and walked around the room, touching things carefully. Their steps were light and quiet, as if they were not sure the floor would hold them. One of them stopped at the window and looked at the endless white outside. Jack watched her as she placed her hand on the glass, then turned to him with eyes full of questions. He brought out old clothes from a wooden chest, warm shirts and socks, and placed them on the table. The girls touched the fabric and looked at him again. He nodded and smiled, trying to show they were free to wear them. They hesitated, then picked up the clothes and went behind a curtain to change when they came out. They looked more comfortable now, wrapped in human warmth, but still alien in their presence. Jack could see they were not from this world, but he also felt they did not want to hurt him. They were scared and tired and far from home. One of them pointed to the fire, then to herself, then to Jack, and made a circle with her hands. Jack understood she wanted to know if they were safe with him. He nodded and placed his hand on his chest. Safe, he said it slowly and clearly. You are safe. The girls looked at each other again and then sat near the fire. Jack gave them more soup and then took out a small notebook. He drew a picture of himself and wrote the word Jack under it. Then he pointed to the girls and handed the pencil to them. They looked at each other again, and the first girl wrote something in her language. The letters were curved and glowing, slightly like light from the moon. The second girl wrote something too, and then placed the notebook on the table. Jack pointed to the first name and said it aloud the best he could. Lear. Then he pointed to the second name, Ness. The girl smiled softly for the first time that night. They sat near the fire, not speaking much, but not afraid anymore. Jack told them a simple story about the forest using hand signs and drawings. They listened closely, trying to understand, sometimes laughing when he made silly faces when the moon rose high and the wind whispered through the trees. They fell asleep again, side by side. Jack covered them with another blanket and watched them for a while before closing his eyes too. He still had many questions, and he knew danger might come one day, but in that moment, the cabin felt warm and full, and no longer silent. In that moment, three strangers shared one roof and one quiet hope for something better. The morning sun poured golden light through the cabin window as Jack stepped outside for firewood. His boots crunched softly in the snow that now shimmered like diamonds under the clear sky. He breathed in the cold air and looked around. Everything felt still and quiet, but his thoughts were not quiet. His mind kept returning to the two alien sisters now sleeping in his bed and how their strange glowing names remained in his notebook. He gathered the wood quickly and returned to the cabin where Lyra was already awake, sitting near the fire with the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes followed Jack as he walked in, but she said nothing, just nodded slowly. Nyxia remained asleep, her chest rising and falling with each slow breath. Jack placed the wood beside the fireplace and added one more log to keep the warmth steady. Lyra watched the flames, then turned her head to Jack and pointed to the small wooden table. She gestured slowly with her hands, her fingers drawing shapes in the air as if she was trying to ask something. Jack tried to guess and pointed to different objects, the cup, the fire, the door, but she shook her head, then pointed to the bag he had left on the shelf. He took down the bag and opened it. Inside were basic tools, matches, a small flashlight, and an old map. She reached out and pulled something from the side pocket, a small metal box that Jack had forgotten was even there. But Lyra knew what it was. Her eyes widened and her hands trembled as she held it in her lap. Jack sat down across from her and watched in silence. She opened the box, and inside was a crystal about the size of a coin, glowing faintly with blue light. She touched it gently, then whispered words in her language, her voice soft like wind through dry leaves. Jack did not understand, but the sadness in her eyes was clear. Suddenly Nyxia woke and saw the crystal. She gasped and rushed over to Lyra, grabbing her hand tightly. They both looked at Jack, then back at the crystal. Nyxia spoke quickly, her voice tense and sharp. She reached into her clothing and pulled out a small device made of smooth black metal with 3 glowing lines across its face. She pressed it and a blue light pulsed once, then faded. Lyra looked at Jack and pointed to the device, then to the sky, then to her own heart. Jack tried to understand her meaning. He could see the fear in their eyes. Something had happened, something more than just getting lost in the snow. He picked up his notebook and drew a picture of the forest and 2 figures running. He then drew a building with tall walls and guards, and finally a symbol of a ship in the sky. Lyra watched and then pointed to the part with the guards and shook her head, no. Then she pointed to the ship and then to herself and Nyxia. Jack now guessed that they had escaped from somewhere, not a jail but something else, something worse. Nyxia opened the black device again and held it near the crystal in Lyra's hand. The 2 objects glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed. She looked at Jack and touched her chest, then made a gesture like breaking chains. Jack felt a chill run through him, not from cold, but from the weight of their message. These girls were not just visitors from the stars, they were escapees, running from a life they never wanted, hunted maybe, and hiding now in his cabin in the middle of the woods. He stood and walked slowly to the window outside. The snow still covered the world, but he could see tracks leading away from the house where he had walked this morning. His heart thumped hard in his chest. What if someone was following those tracks? What if someone was already looking for them? He turned back to the sisters, who now held the crystal between them. Like it was the last piece of their past. Lyra looked at him with wet eyes, then said one word slowly and clearly, pleased that one word reached deeper than any explanation could. It was a call for help, a hope that he would not turn them away. Jack walked over and knelt beside them. He reached out and gently closed the box over the crystal, then placed his hand on its safe. He said again, you are safe. He looked at them both, and then added, though. Wind had returned that night, not strong like before, but cold and sharp like a warning. Jack stood at the window, his eyes locked on a strange light, moving slowly through the trees far beyond the edge of his land. It was not moonlight, it was not fire, and it did not belong in the forest. The light moved with purpose, never flickering, never changing, and something deep inside Jack told him that it was not natural inside the cabin. Lyra and Nyxia slept on the thick rug near the fireplace, their heads resting close, their hands joined. As always, Jack turned away from the window and added another log to the fire, trying to keep his worry hidden, but his heart beat fast and his mind refused to calm. He walked to the back room and opened an old wooden box filled with tools and hunting gear he pulled out. A long, heavy flashlight and his sharpest axe, then stepped outside for a moment to scan the sky. The light was gone now, but the snow had a strange shimmer to it, like something had passed through and left behind. A memory. Jack closed the door tight behind him and bolted it with extra care. He knew something was out there, and it was looking for something or someone, and that someone might be inside his cabin right now. Next morning, the snow around the house looked untouched, but Jack found marks near the trees, not animal tracks, not human either. They were deep round prints in perfect patterns, like machines or boots that did not belong here. He followed them for a short while, then turned back, feeling the hairs on his neck rise, like someone was watching from the shadows. When he returned, Lyra was already awake, her face pale and her eyes locked on the same window where the light had shined last night. She looked at Jack and asked one word. Here. Jack nodded slowly, then showed her. The strange tracks outside her hands trembled, and she ran to wake Nyxia, speaking fast in their language. Nyxia sat up quickly and grabbed the black device from under the blankets, pressing it with shaky fingers. The device blinked once, then made a soft humming noise, like it was listening to the air. Lyra pointed to the door, then to the device, then to herself. Gosh. Jack understood the meaning without words. They had been found, or someone was getting close. Nyxia pulled out the crystal box again and opened it. The blue glow was stronger now, like it was reacting to something nearby. Jack felt a chill in the room. Even though the fire was still burning strong, he walked to his shelves and pulled out canned food and warm clothes, placing them in a large bag. He did not know what would happen next, but he knew he had to be ready. Lyra helped him pack while Nyxia watched the device, her eyes never leaving the blinking lights. Then, without warning, a sound filled the cabin, not loud but deep. Like a pulse through the ground, the fire flickered and the window shook for a moment. Jack grabbed the axe and stood in front of the door, his body tense and ready. Lyra and Nyxia stood behind him, holding each other tightly. The sound faded and silence returned, but the feeling of danger did not leave. Jack opened the small hatch on the floor that led to the old root cellar and pointed down. The girls understood and climbed in quickly. Jack followed and closed the hatch just as the front door of the cabin creaked with pressure from the outside. In the dark cellar, they sat close together, the crystal glowing faintly in Lyra's hands. Jack held the axe tight and listened. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind made him more alert. Above them, footsteps echoed across the floor, slow and deliberate, moving from one side to the other, like something searching with purpose. Lyra reached into her coat and pulled out a small metal disc and placed it against the wall. It lit up and showed faint moving lines like a map or a radar. Jack watched as a red dot moved slowly across the screen, then stopped above them. Girls held their breath, and Jack raised the axe, ready for anything. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the presence above them began to move away. The footsteps faded, the pulse sound vanished, and the strange light in the disc dimmed to nothing. They waited for what felt like hours before. Jack finally opened the hatch and looked around. The cabin was cold and dark, but untouched. Nothing broken, nothing stolen. Just an eerie silence that hung in the air like fog. He helped the girls climb out and close the hatch again. They all sat near the fire and said nothing for a long time. Jack looked at the door and knew that whoever or whatever had come would return again. Lyra placed her hand on his arm and nodded slowly. Her eyes were not full of fear now, but of trust. Jack looked back at her, then at Nyxia, who gave him a weak smile. He stood and walked to the table, pulling out the notebook once again. This time he drew 3 figures standing together with a strong wall around them and fire at the center. He showed the picture to the girls, and they both nodded together. They had faced something dark and strange, and for now they had survived. But the hunters in the snow were not done yet. He will protect youth. Sisters looked at him, then at each other, and slowly nodded. Lyra placed the crystal box back in the bag, and Nyxia put away the black device. Jack stood and tightened the lock on the cabin door. Then checked the windows one by one, making sure nothing was outside but snow and trees. That night, the cabin stayed warm and quiet. Jack sat by the fire while the sisters rested nearby. Their faces were no longer pale, and their sleep no longer restless. Jack did not sleep much, his eyes always drifting to the door, but his heart felt firm. He made a choice to protect these girls from whatever they had escaped, to stand between them and the cold world. Outside, even if he did not yet know the full story, and deep inside he knew the story was far from over. The next day began with heavy clouds above and deep silence below. The cabin stood strong in the snow, but Jack felt the weight of danger pressing against every wall. Lyra and Nyxia moved slowly around the room, speaking in soft whispers, their eyes always checking the window or the door. Jack sharpened his axe again and again, though the blade was already sharp, his mind spinning like a storm without end. Suddenly, the black device in Nyxia's hand blinked 3 times, then gave off a soft tone. Not loud, but sharp enough to break the quiet. Jack jumped to his feet, and Lyra grabbed the crystal box, the glow inside now stronger than ever. Nyxia pointed to the door, then looked at Jack with fear in her eyes and whispered one word, "Coming." Jack understood without needing more. He grabbed the emergency bag he had packed and placed it near the hatch to the root cellar. But then he stopped. His eyes narrowed, and he looked at the girls for a long moment. Then he walked to the window and stared out at the white world, waiting for a signal. Flash of blue light blinked near the trees, something fast and silent, like a ghost slipping between the branches. Jack turned around and looked at the girls, who were now holding hands tightly. Their breath was fast and their bodies tense. Jack walked to them and placed his hand over theirs, then spoke clearly and slowly, "No more running." Lyra shook her head, but Jack raised his hand again and pointed to the door. Then to himself, he had made a decision. One that felt heavy but right. He would fight for them. He would protect them no matter what waited outside. He moved a heavy table in front of the door, then stacked chairs and wood near the windows, creating a barrier as strong as he could build. Lyra and Nyxia helped him without question, their hands working fast, though their fingers shook with fear. Jack handed Nyxia a long metal rod used for the fireplace and gave Lyra the heavy flashlight with a sharp-edged snow began to fall outside. Again, soft but endless, covering the tracks and the trees and the sky. Jack stood in the center of the room with the axe in both hands. His eyes locked on the door, the glow from the fire mixed with the blue light from the crystal making strange shapes on the walls. Then a sound filled the air, a deep hum like before, but louder this time, closer. Jack felt it in his chest and saw the flames in the fireplace flicker wildly. The door shivered under the weight of an invisible force, then something slammed against it once, twice, 3 times. The 4th hit cracked the wood and knocked the table slightly back. Jack shouted to the girls, and they moved behind him, ready. The 5th hit broke the top hinge, and the 6th opened the door halfway, revealing a tall figure in black armor, its face covered with a helmet that glowed red in the center. Did not wait, he rushed forward and swung the axe with full force. The blade hit the armor and bounced off with a loud ring, but the hit was strong enough to push the figure back. Lyra raised the flashlight and smashed it into the helmet from the side, while Nyxia struck the arm with the metal rod. The figure stumbled and fell outside into the snow, but others followed. 2 more shadows stepped into the doorway, but Jack pushed the broken table forward, forcing them back. Then he grabbed the crystal from Lyra's hand and held it high. The glow turned blinding and filled the room with a strange heat. The invaders froze, as if shocked, then turned and fled into the storm. Jack fell to his knees, the crystal still burning in his palm. Lyra and Nyxia rushed to his side, pulling him away from the broken door and wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. They stayed like that for a long time, the snow falling gently through the open door and the fire warming their faces. Jack looked at the girls and saw tears in their eyes, but also something else. Something strong, something like pride, that night. Jack placed the crystal back in the metal box and buried it under the hearthstone. Then he sealed the door with new wood and stronger locks. Nyxia helped him hammer the nails, while Lyra cooked a warm meal using the last of the herbs they had found in the forest. They sat together by the fire, eating quietly, not speaking much, but sharing looks that said more than words could say. Jack reached out and held both their hands, then said the only thing he could think of: "You are not alone." Lyra smiled and nodded. Nyxia leaned her head on his shoulder. The fire crackled gently, and the storm passed once more. But this time, Jack felt no fear. He had made his choice, and it was not just to protect them. It was to stand with them. As one as family, the sun rose slowly over the snowy forest, casting golden light through the frosted windows of the cabin. Jack stood outside near the edge of the trees, his boots deep in snow, his breath warm clouds in the cold air. He looked around with sharp eyes, but the forest was calm. No shadows moved. No sounds came from beyond the tree line. Still, he stayed alert for a while before turning back toward the cabin, where two lives waited, and something new had started to grow inside the cabin. The warmth of the fire wrapped around the small room like a blanket. Nyxia was stirring a pot of soup over the flames, while Lyra sat on the rug with the black device in her hands, turning it over slowly, like it held questions she could not yet ask. Jack stepped in and brushed snow from his coat, then smiled at the sight of both girls safe and alive. They had spent 2 days without visitors, without glowing lights, without deep hums in the air. Jack had repaired the door and added more locks. He had placed sharpened sticks around the path to slow anyone who came too close. He also found time to teach the girls small things like how to use the stove, how to dry herbs, how to boil water for tea. They listened closely and watched everything with wide, curious eyes. That afternoon, Nyxia pointed to a page in Jack's notebook where he had drawn the three of them near the fire with stars above. She touched her name, then touched Jack's name and tilted her head as if trying to understand. Jack took the pencil and drew a heart between the names, then smiled and waited. Lyra picked up the pencil next and drew a simple symbol below the heart, 2 rings, touching one with a small dot in the center. She pointed to the drawing, then looked at Jack and said one word, slowly and clearly: "Husband." Jack paused for a second, then smiled, but looked confused. He pointed to himself and said, Jack then pointed to the drawing and said, "Husband." With a questioning voice, Lyra nodded gently. Nyxia came closer and spoke in their soft, melodic language, saying words he did not understand, but the feeling in her eyes was clear. Jack leaned forward and asked softly, "What does husband mean to you?" Lyra placed her hand on her chest and said, "Safe," then touched Jack's hand and said, "Strong," then pointed to the drawing again and said together, "Always." Jack felt something shift inside him, not fear, not confusion, but something warmer, something deep and full, like the fire that never went out. Nyxia handed him a small woven band made of thread and thin wire. It was simple, but beautiful. She placed it in his hand, then pressed her fingers over his and smiled. He looked at both of them and felt the weight of their choice, not forced, not rushed, but real. They were not asking for promises or traditions. They were showing him their way, their meaning of bond, of family, of trust, built not by blood, but by fire and storms and shared nights in danger. He stood slowly and walked to the shelf where he kept his old wooden ring made long ago by his father. He had never worn it before, but now he slipped it onto his finger and held out his hand to the girls. They reached out together and placed their hands in his, and in that moment, no words were needed. That night they cooked a new meal using roots and dried berries Jack had found in the forest. They laughed when the pot bubbled too much and spilled. They worked together, cleaned together, then sat near the fire in the same place where it had all begun. Jack told them stories from his childhood, using pictures and hand signs while they shared bits of their past with broken words and soft touches before sleep. Nyxia asked again the meaning of a word, and Jack picked up the notebook to write it. Slowly he wrote, "Family," then pointed to the fire, the cabin, the stars above, and finally to the three of them. Lyra smiled and added a line beneath the word, drawing the symbol of their rings. Again the wind outside had gone quiet. The snow was soft and deep, but no longer felt like a trap. Jack knew they were still being watched, maybe still hunted, but the fear no longer owned them. They had each other now, and that meant more than walls or weapons or light in the sky. Lyra laid her head on Jack's shoulder while Nyxia curled beside him with a blanket wrapped tight. He placed an arm around them both and stared into the fire for a long time, thinking not of escape or hiding, but of planting something real, something lasting in a world where nothing made sense and stars burned cold. And far away they had found one small place where warmth stayed on. In that warmth they had chosen him not as a savior, not as a protector, but as their home, their husband. The snow had stopped falling during the night, and the sky above turned clear and soft with morning light. The forest around the cabin stood still and quiet, covered in a deep blanket of white that sparkled like tiny stars. Jack opened the wooden door slowly and stepped outside, breathing in the cold, clean air and listening for any sound, but nothing moved. No light blinked. No wind howled, only peace touched the world. For now inside the cabin, the fire crackled with soft warmth, and Lyra stirred the pot of morning tea while Nyxia folded clean clothes near the corner bed. Their movements were calm and slow, like they had finally learned how to live without fear. Each of them smiled more now, each of them laughed sometimes, even when nothing funny happened. Jack had noticed how their eyes no longer searched the windows, how their hands no longer trembled when night fell. He came back inside with a pile of wood and placed it near the hearth. Lyra looked up and said, "Good morning," with a gentle voice, her words still a little broken but full of light. Jack nodded and returned the greeting with a smile that reached his eyes. Nyxia handed him a small bowl of stew and sat beside him on the floor, their shoulders touching as the warmth from the fire wrapped around them. After breakfast, they began cleaning the cabin together, sweeping the floor, fixing the roof patch, tightening the door hinges. Jack showed them how to hammer the nails and how to check for weak spots in the wood. Lyra took the hammer first, her grip strong and careful, while Nyxia checked the cracks with her fingers and marked them with chalk. They worked like a team, not like guests, but like people who belonged. Later that day, Jack took them outside to the edge of the woods where he had set up a small garden patch last summer. The snow still covered it, but he explained through drawings and gestures that soon it would hold food and flowers and maybe even fruit. Lyra drew pictures in the snow beside his feet, showing long plants with glowing fruit shapes, while Nyxia added stars above them, both smiling. All the while Jack looked at their drawings, then looked at the two girls beside him, and felt something heavy and beautiful rise in his chest. He no longer saw them as strange beings from another world. He no longer saw himself as a man alone in the woods, trying to survive. He saw something bigger, something stronger, something like love that had no need for perfect words. That evening, they made bread together using flour and old herbs Jack had stored away. Nyxia rolled the dough with both hands, while Lyra watched the oven flame with focus. Jack told them more stories this time, about stars and oceans and big cities they had never seen. They listened with wide eyes and soft smiles, sometimes repeating his words to practice, sometimes just holding his hand to say they understood. When the bread was ready, they sat at the table together for the first time, not on the floor, not near the fire, but around a real table like a family. Jack carved 3 wooden cups that week and gave each one a symbol, one for Lyra, one for Nyxia, and one for himself. They kept them near the fire, always clean, always ready for the next meal. Night, as snow fell again in soft, quiet flakes, they all sat together, wrapped in blankets, while Nyxia braided thread into a small necklace and Lyra read from the notebook they had filled with drawings and words and names. Jack leaned back and closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to feel the moment, to hold it like a treasure. Then Lyra spoke his name and asked softly, "We your family now, Jack?" Opened his eyes and looked at her, then at Nyxia, who waited without speaking. He reached out and took their hands, then nodded slowly, his voice calm and clear. "You are my family, you are my home." The girls smiled with tears in their eyes, not from sadness, but from something full and bright. Jack pulled them closer, and they rested their heads against him. The firelight dancing across their faces like stars had come down to watch them dream outside. The snow kept falling, but the wind stayed still. No shadows moved, no danger knocked, no lights flashed in the sky, because this night was not for running or hiding. This night was for staying warm, for being together, for believing that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would come without fear. They had come to him from the cold, lost and silent, chained by past pain and hunted by cruel shadows, but now they were free. Now they were safe. Now they were no longer alone. A small wooden cabin deep in the forest where the world had once felt empty. They had found something greater than escape, greater than protection, greater even than survival. They had found each other, and in each other they had found home at last.